So in the last video, I just showed how to choose fonts for your genre. I'm just showing you this one because it's something I'm working on right now, and this is kind of what we're going to be building towards. So you have a pretty complex background with some elements in the foreground. You've got your text. There's a little bit of a glow effect on some of the fonts. There's also a texture effect on the fonts, but you can't really see it. And then there's some glow effects on top of the character, which I'll show you how to do later. I had actually started putting in a whole bunch of backgrounds, but it's kind of tricky to choose what background you're going to use until you've figured out your character. I'd probably choose the character first and then the background to match, and then finally the fonts, although you could do that in any order. And I already mentioned how in the last video I chose way too many fonts. I really should have just kept it as like 5 or 10 super strong, simple ones. But I do have a lot of options, which I'll be flicking back through later once I am ready to add fonts. And I'll also show you how to add some text effects so it doesn't just look like blank white text. But for right now, I'm going to try to add in some of the characters that I'm thinking about using. After that, I'll go back through and figure out which backgrounds go with it, which characters, or I might have to search for or make a unique background. I'll talk more about that as well. And the other thing is it can be tricky to try to figure out your character and your artwork and everything if you're trying to go around your text as well. Text normally will go on top of everything else, but sometimes it can be kind of interactive with the art if you have elements that come on top of the text, which is kind of cool. Right now I'm probably just going to move it up a little bit so it's not as much in the way. Later I'll probably also talk about how a lot of background art is landscape, which means it's wider, and we're going to have to fill in the sky and the foreground with other elements. But for right now, I'm just going to try to dump in, I'll probably even get rid of this title, and dump in some of the characters that I've looked at and see which one makes the most sense. This is just going to be a super standard sort of urban fantasy. It's pretty easy to have a spooky forest in the background. This could be like horror or thriller, depending on the fonts, but because of the fonts and the characters I'm choosing, it'll be more fantasy. So I actually have a huge file folder full of characters that I'm going to browse through and look at. And I'll also tell you sort of where I got them. I've got a list on creativeindie.com of the best stock photo sites. Some of these are stock photos, and I'll show you what those look like. More like this. This is from Deposit Photos, which is one of the places that I go to. And then some of them are stock renders, which means they've been computer-generated 3D renders. Generally, the 3D renders, the nice thing is they come in a variety of poses. They tend to be pretty cool because you can do the weapons and like the clothing and everything. It's not quite as realistic as you'd get from a photo shoot, but generally cooler. But the faces can look a little cartoonish. Although they're getting really good, some people still don't like the cartoonish factor of 3D renders, so I will often do a head swap and put in like a stock photo face that I find and put it on a render's body. That's also good because people are selling. Here's another one that's this is a stock photo, which you can buy, and stock photos are really cheap. And this is a render, and the renders are also really cheap. People are just selling renders now, which is fantastic. It makes it a lot easier to design book covers with some great art and characters, especially because they come in a lot of body poses, which are really useful, and some really unique characters. The problem is that, you know, everybody else is going to be using these same characters too, so they're going to show up a lot. That tends to happen already with stock photo. A really good stock photo picture is going to be used a lot for a lot of book covers. Renders will also, but there are less designers, and while there are less designers and authors who are using renders, however, it's a really small pool. So of the people who sell book covers or pre-made covers, they're all buying renders from the same people who are giving them to them, which can make it kind of a really small little circle. So ideally, you would kind of hack something together with a different head or a different body or different elements, or at least change the colors or something. In practice, I'm going to try to make all these covers really quickly, so I'm not sure how much of that I'm going to be doing. But let me start by just dragging a few And all of these, I always tend to look for sets of three so I can make at least a trilogy. These come with a lot of other ones, but I'll look for three strong poses. So you want to figure out which pose is going to work well for the first book. The other nice thing about renders is that they tend to be PNGs, which means a transparent background. So I can just drop this in here and it already looks awesome. It's already got lighting effects done on it. I'll have to try to match the colors and the lighting a little bit to match the background so it doesn't look like it's just pasted in there. But it's already a super strong start and much easier than anything else. I'm gonna grab a couple more. You'll also have to decide how big your character is going to be. Generally, it can be about 2/3 of the cover. In an urban fantasy, that's probably going to be bigger because they're more character centered. And in an epic fantasy, it's going to be smaller because it shows the journey or the plot events that they have to go through. But I'm going to keep it about roughly this size for now. This one is a render that didn't come with a PNG, so it's got a white background. There's a couple ways I can get rid of the background. The first is with my magic wand tool. If I just select here, if it's a really clean picture, it'll just select the right portion. But you can see down here, the sword gets eaten away because it's too white. It's too similar to the background. Photoshop also has an object selection tool, which can be really good most of the time, but it's generally about as good as you would get from the other tool I just showed you. So this one seems like it's done a pretty good job. I could hit shift and try to highlight a little bit more to see if it'll pick up this sword, but it won't because it's just that white background. So what I actually have to do is probably use my pen tool here, and I would just zoom really far in and then just select around this part really carefully. Something like that. I can clean it up a little bit later. But that way, if I erase the background from the sword a little bit, then I can go back in with the object selection tool. And this is similar to what I would do if I had a stock photo also for getting rid of the background. Probably I would want to go in a lot closer. You can see that with the automatic tools, sometimes they're not very clean. This one actually looks like it did an okay job. This PNG doesn't look very clean, so I'm wondering if I maybe didn't get the full resolution that I should have. But if I wanted, I could also go to filter and just sharpen it a little bit. Normally this wouldn't really work. With a picture, they don't sharpen very well, but with a render, I think it might be okay. For now, I'm going to stick to the transparent background PNGs because those are a little bit faster and easier. I do have a lot of these that are really good. And although these are shared and sold pretty widely, so I know a lot of other photo and cover designers have probably used these, I haven't really seen any of them used on a great pre-made set. I don't think they're getting as much visibility as they should because they're really cool. So I'm going to try to make some really cool pre-made covers that I can get out there. This one's definitely more sci-fi, so I'm going to have to change the background a lot. I'm going to try that object selection tool again. And it may not work because it gets really dark down here at the bottom. It actually works pretty well. It didn't quite get all of her foot down here, and it didn't get all of her hair. But if I try to just get them to select a little bit more, and I'm going to have to clean up the head and the hair and everything a lot more later too. That generally happens. Hair is a lot of detail work. It's not easy to clip out like I'm doing here. But most of it took okay. I can just hit Control C, Control V if you're on a PC. So I have gone ahead and added quite a few of these characters in, which will give me some flexibility. A lot of these, like I mentioned, are 3D renders, and the faces, like the lighting is actually pretty good, but they just don't seem quite human or emotional, and a lot of the emotion in your cover is going to come from the main character. The background kind of gives a sense of setting. It can add some scenery and especially communicate the genre, but the character is really the thing that captivates readers. So I may need to go back and swap the heads of some of these to a more lifelike character, but the poses are pretty great, especially for magic, urban fantasy. I can, if I need to, add a sword by taking another render that has a sword and just swapping it out so that she's gripping something. I'm going to try to do as little work as possible on these, but I also want them to be really strong covers so that you can see. This one, for example, is a 3D render that was a transparent PNG background. Everything about it is awesome, so all I really need to do is figure out a way to make the background, focus on and enhance the beauty of the image. I also have quite a few stock photos that I haven't bought yet. This one, for example, is from Stocklarium. A lot of these cost like $10, some of them as much as $25 or something. For example, this one from Stock Alchemist is really amazing. I would love to feature her in a cover. A lot of pre-made cover artists won't pay for the more expensive stock, but $25 is really not a lot to pay for an image of that quality. I'm going to start with some of the cheaper or free things that I've already collected. I've been buying renders and stock for a long time, so I've got a lot of these saved up that I don't know what to do with. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to be selling any of these covers or just kind of using them to teach people how to create covers. This is another one I like quite a lot where the face is almost lifelike enough to pass. Anyway, I'll probably start off trying to situate or give homes to some of the renders that I've already collected, and then I might try to do some really fancy stuff with some of the more expensive stock photos that have to be paid for. I should mention, if I haven't already in this video, it's really important to make sure the license that you're getting. For example, some of the premium stock photos, generally if you buy from something like Deposit Photos, it says up to 200,000 or up to 500,000 print books and unlimited ebooks, which is plenty for most authors. Some of the more premium stock photo sites say that it's $8 for the digital and $12 for digital and print, and sometimes you have to pay extra if you want to use those images in advertising or 3D banners or promos or header images or whatever. So make sure you're reading very carefully and you buy the right stock image that you can use. Some of these, like in Deposit Photos, are a little more forgiving, but if you're buying from a small boutique site, everyone's going to recognize, especially in the author world, the cover designer world, everyone's going to recognize where you got that image from, and if they see that you're using it, they may point out that you haven't paid for the rights to use it in the way that you're using it. That's something you want to be really careful of to preserve your reputation. Anyway, so I've got enough. I've got plenty that I could do some fun covers with. So in the next video, I'm going to start to be figuring out the backgrounds for these particular models. Each of these models is probably a certain category, so I have to figure out what genre is the model communicating. Do I need to do a head swap or not? I'll fix all the lighting and the color and the stuff later, but first I just need to figure out how to complement the model with a background that signifies the matching genre so that the genre communication is really clear. And then I'll have to do the same thing with the font later to make sure that the font and the background and the character are all communicating the same genre.